Today, I'll be chatting with Njideka Harry, President, Youth for Technology Foundation, who has been working hard to get more youths to embrace careers in technology. I caught up with her and I started by asking her if Nigeria is making the right investments in technology. Enjoy the chat.
Wow, well, that's a really broad question. I think our investments in technology really need to be focused on the people that technology being built or being innovated around is structured to serve, in other words. And for me, that's really young people, because young people are not just the future, they are actually today. They are powerful creators of ICT solutions, of course, and they have long cycles, long projections. And so bringing those young people in the center of any technology, of course, is critical. And so the investments in technology need to be focused on young people as being co-creators of that technology in which is being designed and developed to benefit the world at large.
What do you think Nigeria can learn from countries that are achieving a lot with technology?
So Nigeria has, a great start in the technology market. I mean, with about 18 million or so in ICT investments alone year over year, I think we're making some good progress in the field and in the landscape in general. But I think, technology is not just for technology's sake, right? It's as a means to an end. So really being able to identify the skills gap and being able to equip young people, especially with the necessary skills that they need to be able to not just use the technology, but actually create the technology is critical. And so I think our investments really should be focused more so on the education sector. And the education sector not just working single-handedly, but really working in partnership with the private sector as well as civil society to ensure that, the best education and the best skills are brought to bear as it relates to young people and technology.
Now, the reason I asked that question is for countries like Estonia that are pretty small, but they've been able to give the world some very great products. What can we learn from them?
I actually think that we do have our own homegrown innovators, so to speak, in Nigeria. We just need to harness that talent. And again, it takes not just the civil society, not just education and academia or the public sector, not just the private sector, but it really takes all three sectors working together to create that enabling ecosystem for young people and everyone alike to thrive and to be able not just to be consumers of this technology, but really producers and the architects behind this technology that, although it's applicable for their local communities, can also be used on a global scale. And perhaps I'm optimistic, but I do think, we are on the right track. We are making those investments where I think is a little bit of, is an area where we could work a little harder, is on creating that enabling platform.
If I would ask you, what is that one policy that you recommend that will radically transform the industry?
I mean, there are a variety of policies, of course, but I mean, the one that I would say is really, the policy around intellectual property and privacy. And there's a lot of confusion there in that space over the last couple of years. Young people growing up in developing countries, they don't really understand. They're not taught exactly what the policies are in relation to intellectual property, especially as far as technology is concerned. And so I think, again, I keep coming back to education and awareness, because I think, it's not necessarily by their fault. It's because they haven't been educated, they haven't been advised on, what aspects to be aware of when it comes to intellectual property in the development and marketing of technology products.
Why did you decide to start an NGO that is focused on youth and technology?
That's an interesting question, and people always ask me the history of Youth for Technology Foundation, and I ask them, do you want the short version or the long version? Because, we've been doing this work for 18 years. Youth for Technology Foundation is an international nonprofit, and I started the organization 18 years ago. I felt a real compelling reason to really do something to bridge what I would refer to as really the digital canyon between developed countries as well as developing countries. And with young people and women at the center of that canyon, we know that access to technology, in my mind, it really should be a basic human right. Access to technology, in my mind, should be like access to water and sanitation and housing, But without this access, young people growing up today can't compete for those 21st century opportunities. And so I thought it was very, very important to put these young people, these innovators, these creatives really in the forefront of really making change in their world. And technology was definitely an enabler in that ecosystem.
Do you think that young people in Nigeria today are being given the necessary support that will help them thrive in technology?
You know, I think there's more to do in that space. And, you know, I see it really as the young people in the middle of, at the center of this conundrum, right? And many of us know the skills gap conundrum, where the education community is pointing to the private sector. Well, we're educating masses of young people and there are no jobs. And the private sector is looking to the education community saying, you know, we have these jobs, but we can't fill these jobs with this particular skill set. And at the end of it, it's these young people really in this conundrum. And I think what we can do, you know, in countries like Nigeria is ensure that these young people have the right skill set coming out of our tertiary institutions. And one way that we can do that is by bringing private sector into the classroom.
You mentioned skills gap. How do we bridge that gap?
It's by equipping the skillers, right? And whether these are teachers, or these are leaders in civil society, whether these are leaders in public and private institutions, they also need to have the right skills so they can impart the right skills. If our teachers are not educated, if our teachers are not trained adequately, if our teachers don't have the correct equipment and supplies to impart the training to the young people, that's clearly a gap that we need to address, working with the government and the private sector.
Some experts have also argued that platform owners, big tech companies, that they make all the money and invest very little in various countries, example Nigeria. What's your opinion? You
know, it's really a global issue, right? And so it's a global issue that requires kind of a global response. And you know, who is involved in this is not just the government, it's not just the technology companies, it's not just private sector or education, it's kind of all of the above, right? For the private sector, for the producers of these technologies, their ultimate goal is revenue, it's profits, absolutely, and that's what they're out to achieve. And so it's really the role of the government and the private sectors to ensure that their citizens are protected to some degree, and that, you know, data is taken seriously and we really understand the ramifications of access to these platforms. You know, because tech companies will create as many platforms as they need to, endlessly. And if there's no feedback and there's no input from those forces within the ecosystem, including the government and the private sector in these countries, you know, things can really, really go out of hand. So I mean, in Youth for Technology Foundation programs across the board for the last 18 years, you know, we've been teaching young people to really be creators of technology. And these are some of the things that come to play, really being able to understand, you know, the users of the technology, being able to use 21st century competency skills like empathy to put yourself in the position of the user and understand, if you were that user, would you want this technology coming at you this way? Would you want the ads? Would you want your information to be, you know, sold or distributed to third parties? And create a product that changes the world, but that takes all of that into consideration.
So congratulations. Thank you for the show today.
Thank you so much, Fred. I'm humbled to be here. Thank you.
That was Njideka Hari, President, Youth for Technology Foundation. I admire her focus and commitment to technology development, and I personally believe the government and the private sector will do Nigeria good by supporting her work. As for young people, technology presents a great opportunity to achieve a lot. You simply need a discipline to make things happen. That's our show for today. But the conversation continues online. Please follow us on social media. Remember, this and previous editions of the show can be seen on the channel's TV YouTube account or via my blog cfatech.ng. For Tech Trends, I'm Chukwemeka Agbata.